The coronavirus pandemic swept almost the entire territory of planet Earth in 2020. COVID-19 divided the human life literally to before and after. What's happening now in different countries of the world? Did we manage to adapt to the new reality? What's the world like during quarantine? All this in the program Stop COVID. Over 11 million infected with COVID-19, about 250,000 deaths, 1 million new cases per week. This frightening statistics comes from the United States of America. Alarming new figures keep coming in every day. How the U.S. is experiencing the pandemic worries not only Americans, but also all indifferent people of the world. This unique but unfortunately sad experience puzzled the whole world. Both politicians who consider coronavirus the main agenda and ordinary Americans are trying to figure it out.
Across America, this was the enforcement of quarantines and lockdowns were mostly left to the states. There was some guidance given from the federal government, but mostly it was a state decision. So governors made their own decisions, and we saw that this was a highly political pandemic in America. And most Republican governors had brief lockdowns, and most Democrat governors had long lockdowns. And some Democrat states have never ended their lockdowns. California and New York have decimated their business communities with these lockdowns.
And although the very first case of COVID-19 in the United States was registered in Washington state, very soon New York became a hotbed of coronavirus in America. Already by the beginning of April, according to official data, there were over 100,000 cases of infection, about 10% of the number of those infected worldwide at the time. It got to the point that there were more cases in New York than in any country in the world. People who could afford to leave the city left immediately in early March. In fact, I just waited until my lease ended, and I also left. I'm in California now. The level of crime has increased dramatically. There are a lot of homeless people. Plus, they released a lot of people from prison due to the fact that there were outbreaks of coronavirus. And it's not very safe on the streets of New York.
The state of Georgia, my state, locked down for 2 months in a sort of a casual lockdown. Most employers were required to lock down, but for most people it was something of a vacation. There was no strict enforcement of it. I don't know anybody in most states in America. I don't think anybody's ever been fined for violating lockdown rules. But in my state, as it was in a lot of Republican states in America, you were asked not to congregate, and you were asked if you went into stores to wear masks. Today we see better mask compliance than we did at that time. Maybe in big stores in my town, it's maybe 70% of the people were wearing masks now, maybe 60%.
Journalist Aksaulia Aljan has collected stories and opinions from American people and presented relevant data and analytics in a special report from the United States of America. Hello, my name is Aksaulia Aljan. I'm a journalist. At the moment, I live in San Francisco Bay Area, United States. Northern California, where San Francisco is located, is one of the few regions in the United States that was able to better protect itself from the coronavirus, keeping the number of cases and death rate under control. But in other regions of the country, the situation is ambiguous. By mid-November, the coronavirus was detected in about 10.5 million U.S. people, of which about 250,000 cases were fatal. In Southern California or states such as Wisconsin and Texas, the situation escalates day by day. The very first case of COVID-19 in the United States was recorded at the end of January in a citizen who returned from the Chinese city of Wuhan. In mid-March, an outbreak of coronavirus infection was recognized as a global pandemic and a state of emergency was declared in the country. Some states have quarantined and imposed restrictions on visiting other states, but these measures failed to stop the spread of the virus. Already in May-June, during the first wave of the pandemic, the death toll from this disease in the U.S. exceeded 100,000 people.
So this is a picture of my mom. She was 88 years old. She would have turned 89.
One of them is 88-year-old Grace Berry, mother of Cynthia Berry. She lived in a special home for the elderly in Maryland, contracted the coronavirus in late April, and passed away in early May.
She was diagnosed with coronavirus and was then isolated in a separate building with other people with coronavirus at that facility, which was at times difficult to staff. And the reason why 40% of citizens in the United States who have died of COVID lived in skilled nursing facilities, in part, is because they did not have appropriate personal protection. They didn't have swabs or the equipment for testing. And equally, or more importantly, they did not have staffing.
Wearing a mask on the streets in America depends on the laws of each state, but in many states and counties, wearing masks is required when visiting public places. For example, in California, where I live, people who walk without a mask can be fined from $100 to up to $500. If the masks are not worn by employees of cafes or shops, then the fine imposed on the business owner, and it can go up to $5,000. Some cafes and restaurants do not serve visitors without masks. On the doors of many shops, it's written that more than 5 or 6 people are not allowed inside. And for example, to enter this clothing boutique, you need to disinfect your hands.
We have a cart in front of the door to let people know that we have a maximum amount of people and they have to hand sanitize, because we do allow try-ons, which a lot of stores don't, but we clean with alcohol, and we require masks inside, and we set the clothes aside when they've been tried on.
It's been a few weeks since Chris's store, which closed in mid-March, reopened, like others in California. Since they also have an online sales platform, she said they did not suffer large financial losses. But for other stores that have not moved their business online, the situation is much more deplorable.
Most of the shops here are not as strong in the online. It's starting to pick up for them, but it's been rough for them. We did have the Nixon watch store, they shut down, which was unfortunate.
Well, a lot of small businesses have failed. I just know, and anecdotally, like for instance, I live near a busy street and a lot of the small businesses are gone. They just couldn't survive not having, customers for months at a time. I am a landlord and I know that I'm having to negotiate rent.
According to a study by sociologists, the number of Americans who lost their jobs in the first 3 months of the pandemic exceeded the number of those who lost their jobs during the 2 years of Great Depression. In April-May, the government allocated more than $2 trillion in financial assistance to Americans in distress. This support was sought by 36 million people without a livelihood. State financial assistance ended in July. According to the National Housing Coalition, 40 million Americans no longer have money to rent property. Realizing this, the U.S. government has banned the forced eviction of tenants who were unable to pay their rent by the end of the year. But despite this, many ordinary citizens harshly criticize the government's fight against the pandemic.
Because our response wasn't really good. I mean, our leadership didn't respond to it and encourage us to wear masks, encourage us to be safe.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the late response that our government decided to put into place. I think we didn't handle it very well. We didn't put up quarantine quick enough, and I think we haven't really made as much of an effort as other places to try and enforce social distancing.
This young man, who recently turned 20, voted in the presidential election for the first time in his life in early November this year. He says his visit to the polling station was triggered by a health crisis.
I think it was really important this year. Because of COVID, I ended up not being able to work at the place that I was working before. We had to close down, and I would really like COVID to end as quickly as possible so that we can get back to some semblance of normalcy,
Where did you work?
I worked at Smythe's Accordion Center. It's an accordion shop over in Oakland. We don't want to have a bunch of people cramped up in a small space, so it's basically just my boss running the shop by himself right now. I enjoy playing music, and I've been meaning to get into busking anyways, but now that I don't have that other form of income, it's especially helpful to be able to come out here and play.
Because the non-functioning commander and whatever instead just decided to politicize the whole thing and set people against each other. So now, even though wearing a mask is the absolute simplest thing one can do and the most effective thing, we're having to argue about it as though it's a political imposition by the liberals against the conservatives. It's like the stupidest thing. So I think that's probably the way that it's affected the country largely.
Many criticized President Trump for his words that the virus was not as dangerous and for the fact that he did not wear a mask in public for a long time. Like his supporters at campaign meetings, the problem arose among several White House officials and even the president himself when they were diagnosed with COVID-19. The fact that the people who support Trump are not very keen on wearing masks, and his rival Biden, on the contrary, has declared the main political slogan "Fight against coronavirus," turned the problem of wearing and not wearing a mask in the United States into a political agenda. Biden advised to take part in the elections, sending ballots by mail, while Trump said that on the election day it's necessary to appear at the station in person. The precise political implication, Trump's win at the beginning and then sudden victory by Biden after the mail-in ballots were counted. The results of this year's presidential elections would also be very different if not for the pandemic. The United States now holds the leading position in the number of infected and fatal cases from COVID-19 worldwide. Aside from the pandemic, the killing of black citizens by police officers that rocked the country in the first half of the year led to the Black Lives Matter movement. The protests, with participation of 15 to 20 million people in May-June, became the largest movement in the U.S. history. And all this happened during the coronavirus outbreak. But many researchers say that such large gatherings did not have a significant impact on the spread of COVID. Because people gathered in the street, in the open air, many had masks on their faces. When we asked what's the reason for the high rates of coronavirus cases in the U.S., we received the following answers.
People here are very, they feel strongly about freedom and being forced to do things. And so people here also have a very individualistic perspective on things instead of a collective perspective. So wearing a mask is to help reduce your spread to others, but people really just don't care about others enough to even wear a mask, which is the simplest thing to do. So people here are pretty selfish, not selfless.
Part of it is that America's very rebellious, and there's a lot of "don't tell me what to do." So that's definitely there, and that goes from and that happens in all walks of life, right? In all income levels, all levels of government.
However, all Americans we asked about the pandemic agree on one thing. The daily life of each of them has changed dramatically. Everyone is very tired of the quarantine, and certainty about the future and hope go side by side.
Everything has changed. Before the coronavirus, I was in a choir. You can't sing anymore. Before the coronavirus, I just finished real estate school. They closed all the testing offices down. Let's see. Oh, we joined a new gym. Then the gym closed down. Doing any trips. Had family that would usually visit us during the summer. They couldn't come, So it's been different. I mean, and this really is we're close friends. We're like family, but she's the only person I've seen outside of my household of 4 people in 7 months, because she's been working at home and is pretty quarantined. Yeah. But I haven't seen anybody besides besides on FaceTime and Zoom. So it's everything is different. Yeah, it's depressing too.
In the summer, as the coronavirus outbreak eased slightly, schools and small business, hairdressers and gyms reopened in some states and major cities like New York, breathing new life into small and medium-sized businesses. But over the past 2 weeks, the number of new infections has broken all records. According to media, many states are considering reintroducing measures similar to the spring quarantine. This means that weekend rules can be tightened again. Despite the fact that the pharmaceutical company said that the coronavirus vaccine trials were successful and it will soon enter the market, citizens understand that it will not cover the entire U.S. population of 330 million people. Americans preparing for the most difficult period of the pandemic, which will likely begin with a winter cold.